So the other advantage of Maxwell, besides being relatively easy to work with for us, is that it works. It has flavors for Mac and PC, and it works for SketchUp. It works for Rhino. It'll work for most any renderer that you can throw at it. In fact, it has a standalone renderer. You can export a Maxwell file, and then you can just open it up in the renderer, and you can render it later without even having to open up like Rhino or something. So it's got a lot of advantages for us. Okay. So this file is pretty basic. It's not a great model, but it's a model, and it has a little bit of like complex geometry. It's got some basic materials applied to it. I see you guys kind of orbiting around it, and it has a camera. So maybe getting back to what I was talking about before, like you always want to have a camera made when you're doing your rendering. You don't necessarily need to model your entire model. You only need to model what's visible to your camera, and that applies to the interior and the exterior of your building. Okay. But you do need to model things that might be like reflected or things that might cast shadows. I mean, you have to kind of use your head, but if you know what your views are going to be, you can plan for that. You don't have to model the entire thing. You don't have to, you know, you're not going to model like the bathrooms if no one's ever going to see into a bathroom, right? Or no one's ever going to see it in the hallway. So you can use your judgment for that, and the less geometry you have, the faster your renderers are going to go. Render time is increased by the complexity of the model, by the quality, by the number of materials you apply, okay? So the more you can simplify that, that's also going to cut down the rendering time. So if you plan ahead, it will make things easier, okay? Okay, so in this model, I have some basic layers. You don't have to do your layers by material, but we'll see in a minute that that kind of helps, okay? I think a lot of you guys are probably modeling right now based on the layers you had, like based on the elevations. Like, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to show you how to apply materials to objects, as well as every object on a layer. And we'll talk about the pros and cons for that. Okay? So real quick, just watch me do this and then kind of follow along. So I've got the camera. I'm going to go ahead and just go to, if you're not there yet, or if you went past it, just go to my camera. Okay? So set view my camera. Just because I want to have a common thing, and then we can kind of play with it from there, but I want everybody to have this camera. This is not a great camera. It's a little bit helicoptery, but good enough. So the first thing you got to do, you probably won't have this, is you go into render, and you go from current renderer, and you change it to Maxwell for Rhino. Okay. So when you do that, it's going to open up. You're going to get this Maxwell tab now. You're going to have Maxwell thing in your menu. Okay, you won't have that unless you change the renderer. Okay, none of this applies until you change your render. Now, when you get into Maxwell, you're going to want to open up the scene manager. It's the first window. Okay, and this is going to have, and you're going to have to do something with it, and just kind of make it a little smaller. Don't. It tries to dock automatically into everything. I really don't care for it. This is actually one of the things, if you have a dual monitor, it's actually really helpful. Or if you can plug your laptop into a monitor or like what have you. This stuff gets, once you have the layers open and everything, it gets kind of cluttered. But scene manager, okay. So scene manager, all these different tabs are going to control the major attributes of our scene. Okay. The other thing I want you guys to open up, and this is going to get even more cluttered, is you go to Maxwell, rendering and export, and you're going to open up Maxwell Fire. And Fire is another thing that I think makes Rhino kind of that makes Maxwell kind of advantageous for us, is because Maxwell Fire is essentially a real-time render. If your stuff's getting docked like accidentally, just take the tab, just take the mouse and grab the top of it, of the tab piece, and pull it out of it until it disengages. I'll show you. Okay, so this thing grabbed up there, right? Like, I hate that. If you put your mouse here and you click and grab, you can pull it out of there. On the side here, on that little kind of textured piece, you can pull it out. Okay. There you go. You freed it. It's kind of a pain in the butt, I'll tell you. Okay, so once you got Fire going, you're going to click on this little globe, and that's going to load the meshes. So it converts the geometry into meshes, and it loads it into the Maxwell buffer and the Fire buffer. Fire buffer. Let it crank for a second and check that out. So that's actually like a little, that's not your rendering, but that is our rendering. Okay. Now everything's selected, you can just deselect it. Check this out. When I rotate the model, it actually slightly, it tries to update. That's pretty good. It's kind of fuzzy, you know, but you get the soft shadows and the hard shadows. This is the advantage of Maxwell and this kind of renderer over other renderers. Not to get too technical, but I will for a second. So when you do like the standard render, you guys have seen this in like SketchUp or even the default render in like Rhino. You get these hard shadows. You get these like almost like drawn shadows, right? They have the hard edges. Look at these shadows, the kind of soft edge that you get. Let me get this window back here. So you see that kind of bleed where it goes from a hard to a soft. That's because the way that light works in this kind of a renderer is more like photons. And so, you know, the sun is constantly spewing out like light at us, and they're kind of, you know, sort of like these quantified pieces of light. And what photons do is they hit surfaces and they bounce around. And so you don't just have primary rays, you have like secondary and like tertiary rays. And what that does is it takes a shadow, and if it's exposed to light from another side, it actually softens it a bit. And it actually softens the edges of shadows. So instead of just getting that crisp edge, look at the edge of this piece. You actually get kind of a self-shadowing. So it's really subtle. It's really just a nice, like, soft edge. And this is what you get on an overcast day, right? Because the clouds are, the water in the clouds is diffusing those photons and kind of creating kind of a mist, right? Whereas the sun, like direct sunlight, is like a fire hose, right? It's going to push you over. It's going to, if it touches the edge of something, it's going to spray in a really hard edge. But if you make a mist, you know, with it, right, it just kind of coats everything evenly. Okay? Let's go back to the view. So that's so Maxwell creates a really soft, you know, and this makes it more like realistic looking, because this is the way that light actually works. It's not just this crummy kind of like light tracing that you get in SketchUp. It's actually more like realistic, physically accurate light to a certain extent. Okay, look at the dark shadow back here because of the depth of those punctures and like the overhang, and then the light kind of shadow on the edge here. Okay. Let's play with the settings a bit more. So we go into the Scene Manager tab. There's a couple of things. You want to go into the optics thing here, and there's this value called EV, and that's exposure value. Remember I told you guys how like rendering kind of taught me about cameras and taught me about, you know, like, I mean, like how to take good photos. Exposure is like how much light gets let into the camera, and it's like how exposed that like film gets, right? If you don't expose it very much, it's dark. If it's overexposed, right, it's blown out. Exposure value is just a really simple way of like of sort of governing the exposure in your Maxwell image. And so you can click on the little widget here, and I can add like EV, and this actually works the opposite of what I just explained it. But if you have a higher EV, look, the image gets like darker. There's still kind of a balance to it, but it's overall like less exposed. It's like underexposed. And then if I reduce the value, it actually begins to blow out. See, now I begin to lose the edges of things, like it's actually overexposed. Okay? So you just want to try to adjust for your image so that you get a good range of contrast and a good range of exposure, not too dark, not too light. The biggest problem I have with a lot of the upper year renderings that we see, you know, is that they're just so dark. You know, they don't play with the exposure. They don't go back in Photoshop and like modify it. They just kind of crank out these renderings that are just so dark. And I think a lot of it happens to be because they aren't really looking at the exposure values too well. Okay, so not too dark, not too light. Okay. And so like 13 is kind of like a default, which is pretty good. But, you know, 12, like to me, look at the difference in this image and like this image. You pick up a little bit more white here, like a little bit brighter, and you still have the rich blacks. You have a full like tonal range in the image, right? Basic compositional theory. See, too much. Because you lose some of the midtones there with that exposure, okay? So every time you do a rendering, like you have a camera, keep track of what that EV should be for that camera. Okay, you don't have too many of these, so it's not going to be like that hard. 13's pretty good. And I'm not going to mess with anything else for this. Like, we're just going to stick with it. Okay. Now, let's go to the next tab, environment. So the type of environment right now is a sky dome, and this is what I'm talking. This is kind of like what you get again on like a cloudy day, really like diffused kind of light. Check the sun. Okay, so now look at the direct. So this is like the stuff you got out of like SketchUp, right? You get the crisp shadow because when you have a sun, you have direct light and you have indirect light. Okay, but what happened to the image? You like it? It's washed out. What do we do to fix that? Yeah, mess with the exposure. And that's exactly what you guys want to do. And I would, so already better. So you get a mixture of indirect and direct light, which is what a real, well, I mean, the way it's like in the real world, okay? Unless it's on like a cloudy day. Now, for your models, I mean, shadows are good, right? Because they kind of tell us what sides are facing us and what sides aren't. They kind of help define space a bit. And they have a kind of like a spiritual play. You may decide that for yours, you may just want to make it overcast. You're designing cemeteries, right? So the mood might not involve direct light, or maybe it does because you want to show off those forms some more. I mean, it really helps you. It really helps you to like define those forms, right? You get the different sides of it. Okay, another setting here is you can go into the sky dome and you can change the kind of indirect light. So there's sky dome, and then there's what's known as physical sky. What physical sky takes into account is all the particulates in the air and the like temperature of the light, and you can see it kind of has like a bluish light. And once again, it's actually a little bit washed out, so we actually need to play with the exposure slightly. It also creates a kind of a physical sky background, like you get kind of a cloudy or sort of a hazy sky. We're going to put our own sky in, but I'm just saying that that's where some of that comes from. So the temperature changes, and you're like, well, I'll show you. So it's a slightly kind of, the light's slightly kind of orange, but there's kind of a bluish tinge to the shadows. You go back to the sky dome. See that? How much richer. This is kind of like the difference between like, the film and then when they do like the color correction in like movies now, where they add the filters to like Lord of the Rings or something like that, where they kind of oversaturate or kind of saturate the image. So that's the difference between like the kind of sky dome and like physical sky. You just notice that, how there's kind of a richness to the color. Let's kind of play with it some more here. You may like that, you may not. It's your call. But look at already how much nicer that is than in the SketchUp. You guys have probably seen stuff like this before, but it's nice. Okay. Another point I want to make. Your model must have a base. Like it has to have topo, some kind of grounding element. Okay, why?
Because it's on a site.
Well, that's true. That's true. If that were good enough, my students would always do it. But
because if not, it won't have anything.
Shadows need to be cast on something. Very good, Rachel. What about light? I mean, remember I talked about like light gets scattered?
The ground
The ground actually scatters it back onto the building. It actually illuminates the building partially. So not only does it catch shadows, it bounces light back onto the building. You guys ever seen like a movie set before? Or like a TV show when they're filming it? Or like a fashion photography thing?
Yeah, the reflectors.
They hold up reflectors to bounce the light back onto the person because it's a softer like light. The ground is like a big burly guy holding a reflector. Okay?
How do you position where the sun's going?
We're going to talk about that. Thanks, Lindsay. You just set up the next thing. All right. So anyway, before I move on, I just want to say, you guys know this, but I'm going to tell you this. Have a ground. You need a ground for all the reasons we talked about. Okay. Also, it has a horizon. Right? It gives you a sense of like depth, a sense of like distance, a sense of like grounding. If you have a ground model, make sure that it actually goes past where you're framing the image. because otherwise it's just like a big chunk of stuff floating in the sky, right? You need to ground the image. Okay, you can do it in Photoshop too, but I think it's more helpful just to like overextend the bounds of your site. Okay, okay. Lindsay's right. So the next thing, go into this tab right here for location and time. Now we're not in Central Park, New York City, so you can go in, and I do believe that Charlotte is in here. We ought to be. We're a major metropolitan area. Charlotte, and that's Charlotte Airport, but close enough. That's what AP means. Okay, not that big of a deal. We just changed a little bit of latitude, but whatever. The rotation is actually, so if you consider 0 to be up, like if your file is oriented so that north is facing, like 90 degrees up, don't touch anything. If it's not, then you can rotate the scene. So if it's rotated, you can say negative 90 degrees or 45 degrees, whatever you want that north arrow to be, you can type it into the scene rotation thing here. And then that will actually, so I just rotated the whole like world there, okay? And that's actually what I love about fires. You can do this stuff actually like interactively, and it actually, Antarctica, oh my gosh. I just lost my thing here. Charlotte, there we go, okay. And check this out, time of day. See how the sun kind of moves around? What do you guys know about the best time of day to take a picture? Anybody ever talk to you guys about that?
Is it cloudy or sunny?
For what?
To take if you want to take a good picture of a subject. Twilight, okay. Any other times?
Full brightness, the sun's coming out.
Yeah. Sun's coming out, sun's going down. Why?
No direct sun.
On the horizon.
Where's the sun at that point in time? It's low, and then what's it pointing at then?
Yeah.
Side. It's pointing at your building. It's pointing to the side of your building. What happens at noon? It's on the top of your building, right? It's illuminating your roof, but not your facades, right? Not the like beauty piece of it, unless your roof is what your subject is, right? Remember they refer to this as like magic time, like like the magic hour. They like to try to film TV shows and things like that, like at dusk or at dawn, because the light is coming at the side of your subject. And that helps you define the form as well. So you can verify this experimentally. Now, this is not the best time of day for this side of the building, though, right? Because it's actually, this is darkening it. So I would actually play with it until I get later in the day, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, not maybe dusk, but at least I'm, coming in towards the end of the day. Notice how the color changes slightly. It actually gets more red as the sun sets. That's the physical sky, okay? You may want that, you may not. You don't have to get gimmicky. Check that out. See those long shadows and that like orange kind of sky?
So you can pump the exposure from that too.
Yeah, you could do that, exactly. You could go in and kind of trick it out. But see, there's kind of a limit to what you can do, You can do a lot in Photoshop too, but yes, good call. Okay, so location, time of year, day, that all seems pretty self-explanatory, right? So what I would do is I would set up your file for your location and the general like time of year. What are the best times of year to take? I mean, just if you had it, unlimited. You guys done solar studies?
Yeah.
Equinoxes are good times of year because the days the equal amount. So you actually have the most daylight, or you have a lot of daylight. Not the most daylight, but play with it. Okay. Again, you have cemetery. Maybe you do stuff in the autumn. Maybe it's like autumn, like late in the day. It's about a mood. Maybe it's Easter morning or something. Whatever you guys want, you can calibrate your rendering for that. And then again, so save cameras, like save times of day, save exposure values. Like just keep a Post-it note or a text file. The file will store them, but it won't store them for multiple images. I guess you can save them as presets, but I don't want to get into that. So it's just a few settings. Okay.
If we want to shoot at night, can we have light sources in the building, or is that not?
We can talk about that. That's pretty difficult to do.
Okay.
That may be beyond the scope of this course.
Then forget it.
Okay. Light is your friend. Putting lights in is a pain. Is a PETA. It's a pain in the ass. Okay. Yeah, it's possible, but anyway. So that is mostly what has to do. Look at that, the way it catches the edge of that, like the light on the side. Pretty good. Okay. So there's no excuse for, dark, underexposed, like not beautifully lit renderings of your building. Now, this is like a chipboard or homosote model, right? It's like gray, everything's gray, right? We need to add some materials to the building. Before I do that, though, you guys have any questions about this? Is this like jiving? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Maxwell materials. Maxwell, the other thing that's nice about Maxwell, why we like to use it, is because Maxwell has kind of an obscene amount of materials available for it. I mean, like anything you can possibly, this is actually pencil shavings as a material. Oh wait, my internet's, let me restart my internet here. But anyway, yeah, pencil shavings. Crazy, right? Get on the internet here. But I've given you guys some materials. They're actually on Moodle right now. You can get some off the internet. You do need to register to use the Maxwell site. There's resources.maxwellrenderer.com. I'm logged in. Hey, Ann Sensky. So just get a free account for yourself, okay? And you can download like as much as you want. Look at that, pencil shavings. How ridiculous is that? It's like, some like old wood, stuff like that. Textures are kind of funky. I mean, they are just kind of pictures that get wrapped around things, and we do a little bit of computational trickery to make them look like they have texture to them. But for the most part, textures are really about just color and about how that responds to light. So like glass is very glossy. Concrete is usually not very glossy, right? It's going to scatter light differently. That's really what we're interested in, okay? So don't get too crazy about materials. That's why I've actually given you materials, because I really don't want you guys to spend a lot of time shopping for materials. I just want you to like, if it's concrete, fine, it's like concrete. If it's wood, like it's just a basic, doesn't have to be this particular like kind of hardwood from like Brazil. It just, is it like redwood? Is it light wood? Is it driftwood? That kind of thing. Okay.
We don't have access to Maxwell.
The school computers, you have access to Maxwell. You can buy it and put it on. There's no student edition. That's actually a good point I wanted to make at the beginning. So a bottleneck for you guys who work at home on these things is the fact that you're going to have to use Maxwell on the school machines. And but the advantage of it is though you're going to do the rendering on it, so that'll free your computer up for other work, which is nice. The other thing is that it's easy to do. All you do is save your file for Maxwell and then just open it on a computer in Maxwell and just render it. So it's easy. Just take it on a thumb drive, and you're good to go. Okay.
Which computers do you only here, or is the other computer?
Every machine in the building should have Maxwell on it. Okay. Just everything, as far as the eye can see. Okay. That being said, like again, everyone's going to be using the computers, probably doing renderings, things like that. So like plan ahead. Like if you're going to be here, like when no one's around, it's a great time to just fire off a rendering. Like again, renderings are great for doing chores and eating and things like that because you don't need to be there. It's just crunching. And we'll see that in a second.
I have a question. Like you may think I'm crazy, but is there like a protocol? Like, can you like
is there like an etiquette
on like 4 computers?
I think like good. I think good. Etiquette, right? Like the golden rule or something. Like don't if you came in the lab and the whole row was rendering and it said these are my computers, like you wouldn't be too happy about that. So like at least 1 is definitely okay. 2 maybe if no one's around or it's very late. But like generally I wouldn't just muscle all these things. We have a render farm, but it's never working. I'm just gonna say don't count on like that ability. If you plan for this and if you figure out the settings that you want and then you just do your final like push, I mean it's really easy just to like start a rendering and go home and come back and your rendering is
I guess I was
done.
more curious because I've like gone in the lab before
Sure.
and like all of the computers.
Well, that's crummy. Yeah, you don't.
Yeah.
That you don't be like that. Yeah, that's no good. Okay, so set up an account for Maxwell Renderer, and you can find if you want a specific. I know you guys probably have stuff that I don't have in my thing, but what I have for you guys is a basic. Like I went out the other night and crawled through here, and I just have some basic concretes. I have some glass and grass, white plaster walls. Right, everybody loves drywall. Some basic metal stuff. Paper model materials. These are materials that I collected that make your model look like it's a physical model that you made out of chipboard and cardboard and plastic and styrofoam. That's kind of a gimmicky thing, but it's kind of fun. You can convince people you made a really cool, crafty model. For you guys, though, I'd rather you guys look at a realistic model. Okay, so I have some basic materials that are on Moodle for you guys. Let's take a look at how to add a material to something. All right, so materials, as I said, you can add a material by object or by layer. The easiest, so what you want to do first is go into your scene manager, right? Maxwell plugin, scene manager. Go to this little material tab here. So no materials, okay. Right click, and you're going to say import MXM. I'm going to assume that you're going to load materials that somebody else already made. You are not going to make materials. I am not going to teach you how to make materials. They're not going to be as good as the materials that are out there. Don't even bother, okay? Again, if I had my whole semester, we would do that. But we're going to go to import material, go into my Maxwell materials, and if I had something that I downloaded, it would show up here. I'm going to go in, and I'm just going to get a basic kind of concrete, I have this concrete material. It's concrete TM, okay? Open it up. If you have my files from Moodle, this is in there. So then it shows up as a material. You can double click it, and I can click this little preview window, and it's just going to render. So it looks like concrete. It's got little pits in it. It's got little like stains in it. It's just kind of like cast in place concrete. Okay. So a lot of you guys have concrete. I do this for you. Okay. So concrete is in my materials palette. I'm going to go and close this for now. I'm going to open up the properties window. So F3. Gets crowded in here. So the two ways you can add material. So I can pick an object like this wall and say, okay, that's a concrete wall. That's a concrete wall. You go into properties, and usually it says object. You can change it to material. You're going to assign the material by plugin because Maxwell is a plugin. And then you say browse, and then you double click concrete, and then that's actually been applied. And if you go into Fire again and you reload it, you have to actually reload the thing because it has a new material applied to it. Double check here. See, it's actually slightly different. You see how that is compared to like that. It might not show up in the preview window, but so that's how to basically just apply a material to like one object. Okay. Yeah, and if you could refresh it. Okay. Now you can actually apply materials to an entire layer. If I went into this concrete layer and I right click it, I can go to Set Properties, Material, Assign by Plugin, Browse, and then I can say OK. And then if I refresh, everything has that material applied to it. Again, it might not show up. I might need to go into my settings and just play with it a bit because the physical sky might be kind of preventing us from seeing the difference here. Yeah. Anyway, so that's one way to apply that material to it. Let's go ahead and apply a glass material in the same way. So I'm going to go into Maxwell again. Scene Manager, tab, right click, import, and then I've got a glass. And I have a glass material that I made that's called basic glass. And this is your all-purpose glass. If you look at it, it's just like clear glass. It's got like a basic sheen to it. A little hint about glass in here is that if you want to affect the color of it, just change the transmittance color. And what I've done is it's slightly blue, like it's got like a little bit of like tint to it. It's not just like completely clear because glass usually isn't, unless it's just like, if it's a railing or something like that, it's usually got like a little bit of gray tint or a little bit of blue tint, or a little bit of green or bronze. Or I give it just a little bit of color so it's not just clear, and that shows up better in the renderings. Okay, so you can see it's like barely, it's like almost white. You can do other things to it. If you make it a regular color, it's going to be like pop bottle glass. It's going to be like green. Okay. If you go into, you're in the basic glass material, go into this base layer, basic layer. So you have to click on this basic, and then you change the transmittance. Then you'll probably want to resave it as something else, but this is my basic glass. It's slightly blue. Okay, so that's my material. It's in there. I'm going to go ahead and go to my glass layer, say Set Properties, Material, go to Plugin, go to Browse, go to Basic Glass, click OK. And that should apply it to my scene. I keep losing my Maxwell Fire. Like, more windows are better. It's not applied. Uh-oh. Hang on a second. Sign by plugin. Okay. Oops. Did I just apply that entire glass? Okay. Might have messed something up there. Okay. Glass is going to be really intensive too because it has reflections and it has like transmittance and stuff. So like the more materials you add like that, like the longer it's going to take to render your building. So hang on a second here. Okay, so if I go in, let's make sure I got this set up. Material. Yeah, for some reason that didn't take on the last one. Go click concrete, click OK. Okay, so now it says assign material concrete. So you need to read that in the name box for that to be registered. Let's see, material, plugin, glass. Okay, good enough. Now let me go into Fire again. Make sure. Now there's stuff we can do with this to actually speed up the preview. But first you have to load the file. Oh, you know what? Yeah, okay. So I might have messed up a setting here. So you want to make sure to select everything and make sure that it's assigned. If you're going to do it by layer, select whatever you want to be assigned by layer and say assign by layer. Okay? That way it's going to actually pick up what you've set up in these layers. That may be the problem with my file. Yeah, for some reason it keeps bouncing back and not giving me my stuff. Okay, so now I made everything glass. Okay, and then if I go in, go to concrete, material, plugin. Yeah, for some reason it's like resetting my settings here. Huh? I got an issue with this. Assign by material. This is one of the things that like worked in my office and now isn't working. Okay. Bear with me here. Huh. I mean, you can also just click in the thing, assign by plugin, basic glass. It's usually it shows up. Yeah, it's applying it to everything. It shows up here in when it says like material library. It should show up in the layer. I don't know. Yeah, it says it's a glass material. Wow. Okay. Hold up a minute. Double click on the glass layer. Okay. Oh, you have to be in that layer to do it. Ah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now I've got it. It didn't show up again. Yeah. I mean, again, it was working in my lab.
Oh, it's because you're Xing out of it. You got the OK at the bottom.
Oh, okay. There's an OK at the bottom?
Oh, down there.
But I did that, though.
No, there's an OK down there.
Uh-huh. Oh, it's like, but why is it not showing up?
I don't know, but that's why.
There's one at the bottom of this.
Yeah, there is.
Which
Okay.
one is it? If you pull yours up?
It's the left one.
It's the left one? Okay, this one? Ah, there you go, basic glass. Thank you. This, you know what it is? It's this tiny, when I plug it into the full screen projector, it cuts off my screen. Thank you guys. Okay. We help each other out. We're a big family. Okay. Concrete, and then click the left nub. There we go. Okay, now let's Maxwell preview this guy. And fire. Better. So you can see how that actually is you see that? How you can see through it, but it's slightly tinted?
Right.
That's what you want. You'll probably notice that actually adding the material changes the exposure a bit too. So you'll have to go back into the exposure values and kind of play with that a bit. You want it to be, you want it to look good. So you have the grounds like slightly different. different materials, different glossinesses are going to pick up different things, and you're just going to have to compensate for them. Let me go back to physical sky again. Whew. Okay. So that right now, what it's mostly adding for us is color, which is good, but it's not adding. If you really like dig into it, it's not actually producing texture. Let's zoom in. Even with the fuzziness of this Maxwell preview, like it's just not showing up. It doesn't look like the concrete swatch. Okay. That's because we haven't applied texture mapping to it yet. Like we haven't actually mapped it. And what that means is that textures are like wrapping paper, right? Like it's printed and you kind of wrap your present in it. You're going to wrap your building in it. So you have to tell the computer how to wrap the present and how much paper to use. Okay, it'll make sense in a second here. I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to show you guys something, and then we're going to go back to this. So don't change your piece. I'm just going to show you. I'm going to demo something for you here. I got all these windows here. Whoa. See, you don't even need to see your file. Oh my God, it got even worse. Terrible. I'm just going to kill some of these. Look at that. That's awful. Okay. I'm an expert. Oh, gee whiz. Oh, okay, you know what? I'm just going to reset the view. Yeah, it didn't work. Okay. Hang on a second, guys. Sorry. There we go. Back to normal. Okay. Sort of. Okay. So I'm just going to make some geometry just to show you guys some texture mapping here. This is one of my pet peeves is when students don't pay attention to it, because it just says that they're just applying materials and they're not paying attention to like how the materials are used. Okay. For instance, well, I'll actually show you. Okay. So I'm going to go into Maxwell. I'm going to go into my plugin, my scene manager. Pull this out. Go to my materials library. I'm going to import. I got this material off online that was like. Well, I'll just get one of these actually. I'll show you. So I got this. Let's say I got this material that's just kind of wood. Like I want this kind of like cherry wood, right? It's like a coffin or something. I don't know. For my my website or for my. So that's what it looks like. It's got kind of a finish to it. It's got kind of a grain though. Okay.
What the hell is that thing, by the way?
It's just a little widget that shows you what it looks like. It's just a little demo widget. That's the technical term, is widget. Maybe Zebron. I need something that has like a grain to it. Okay, so I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to download it. Pardon me here. Why it's not letting me download? I am registered. I'm logged in. Oh, my goodness. Hang on a second. It probably logged me out here. Yeah. Okay. Everybody try to guess my password. All right, there we go. So you got to be logged in. So wood. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, I'm going to grab something that has a grain to it. So actually, this is great. Okay, so these have like slats. So a lot of your stuff is, you don't just buy giant sheets of wood, right? I mean, you can get like plywood and things like that, but usually your building's made out of boards, or like your floor is like boards, or your wall or whatever. Even if you have concrete, right, it's kind of panelized, or it's got tensioning like holes in it. It has a rhythm to it, right? And that rhythm is something that you can actually like control. What you don't want to do is apply that big piece of wrapping paper that's like one sheet of concrete and wrap it around your entire building. People do that, okay? It's like you have to pay attention to the tiling of it. Are there like 4 panels on this wall, or like 1 panel, or like 10 panels, right? You don't just take one thing and apply it everywhere. You have to pay attention to the tiling of it. So the same thing with these boards. Like if I applied this to a wall, it's going to look like my boards are like giant sheets of plywood when I want them to be little tiny like parquet boards or whatever. Okay? So scaling, tiling matter. So I'm going to download this, and it's going to give me old wood deck floor. Perfect. Okay, open this up, and you get all these files. I'm just going to go ahead and drop. You need to maintain the structure of the file, because it has the Maxwell material, but it needs these JPEGs, okay? Because those are the pictures, the texture, okay, the image. You need all that stuff. You need to maintain that. So we go into Maxwell. Go into Rhino. I'm going to open up. Oops. Yeah, I'm in import. I'm on my desktop. Oh, what happened? I thought I opened that up. Did I put it? Where did I put it?
Did you extract it?
Oh, you know what? It's just on my desktop. Yeah, extract to a folder. Good call. Good call. Okay. There's always a reason. Okay, then open up the material, and then there's my material. Okay. So now I go in, and I'm going to go in, and I'm going to assign the material by plugin. It's this material. Now, oh no. Oh, even worse. See, even happens to me. Okay. It's so happy. It really just wants to stick to everything. Okay. If I go in, I don't want that. If I go in, I'll go in perspective view here. I'm just going to close this. Okay. You can see what you've got. So we have these different things, these different views. If you go to rendered, it'll actually, I need to go to Maxwell. And let's do fire and see if it actually applied. Yeah, so there's the actual tiling of it. Okay.
When did you apply it? I guess you did this.
I went into the setting and I opened up the properties and I went to material
okay.
and I said by plugin
Okay.
and browse, etc.
I thought you placed that.
Yeah. Yeah. For some reason, this is actually it's not showing up the way. Usually you can see the tiling of it, and I don't know what the problem is with this particular material, like why it's loading up like that map. Let me try a different material just because I want to actually show you.
I think it's showing the nails.
Yeah, but that's not what I want though. Bear with me here. Let's see. It's not my Dropbox. Well, we'll just go with it, I guess. Okay. Most of the time, you'll see the actual wood on here. I'm not sure. You can see it in the fire window, so that's good. Okay, so we'll open up fire. Okay, so I've got this material. Notice, okay, so let's say this is like 20 feet. This is 20 feet by like 5 foot. That's crazy, right? That looks like these giant like boards. Maybe that's what you want, but like that's probably not what you want. So we need to go in and actually change the texture mapping. So if I click on this, I go into my properties again, and I want to go to texture mapping. I'm going to pull this over.
This is due next semester, right?
Sure. You guys won't have that much of this to do. And in fact, you can actually just texture map like the whole building at once if it's just the same kind of concrete tiling. You don't have to do it individually by object, okay? And I take it you don't have too many materials either. You probably have like 3 materials.
Yeah, she told us to keep it simple.
Yeah, and that's good. And I'm going to help you. Don't
Just
worry about it. All right.
spin me.
Can you texture map on layers?
Yeah.
By layers. Well, what you do is select everything on the layer, and then you can just map the whole thing at once. I'll show you that. Okay, I'll show you. So this is the small example. Then I'll show you the building example. Okay, so I got this wood that I downloaded, and I'm gonna go in, and I don't know a better way to do this, so I'm just gonna do this. You open up this properties tab. So I hold down the mouse, and this opens up. Then I open up the materials piece, and I hold down the mouse, and this pops up. Then I open up this like texture mapping thing, and then that's what I want.
This would drive me crazy. Finally, a reason for it.
What, texture mapping?
Well,
Or mid-
just usually when you.
Which
Okay.
one is the type of drawing symbols?
Just add the video. You can just follow the video. Slow it down. All right, so I have texture mapping, and there's different kinds of mapping. And there's like planar, which is just like a big plane. There's box, which means if I have something that's like a 3-dimensional box, which is most of our buildings are like boxes, right? The walls are boxy. So we're pretty much going to use box mapping exclusively. Clark might use spherical mapping on his sphere, but he's the only person I can think of who would ever have a need for it. Okay. So you click on your object, and you're going to click on box mapping, okay? And then it says apply channel 1. That's fine, channel 1. And then you actually, using your snaps, you're going to snap to the back left corner. So that's the back left, and then front left corner, and then right edge, and then the height. And you basically just trace out. And sometimes your object is a box. Other times it's like squishier. So you just kind of put a box around the object using dimensions. I'll show you on the building how you do this with the whole thing. So now I've mapped this, and I say texture space single. Okay, now we've got tiling, and it says U1, V1. That's U. So there's no X and Y in texture space because it might violate sort of like Cartesian space. So we use U and V. So U is X and V is Y. And W is Z. All right? It seems to make sense to me. All right.
What's Z?
Z is W. So just take like X, Y, Z, U, V, W.
Okay.
Okay. Z is depth, right? If it has like a depth to it. X and Y should be self-explained. Don't worry about it. Anyway, it's the tiling. Okay. Now, I'm going to apply, this is going to apply some basic mapping to it. And you can just go ahead and say tiling 1 and V1, and nothing's going to change. Okay. If I go into my texture mapping properties, once I've mapped it, it says that there's channel 1 active. I can go through this list here, and I can actually play with some things like the UVW repeat here. So check this out. I can change this. So this is 1. Now if I double it, if I say I'm going to repeat it twice, it actually changes the tiling of it. You can see that these little knots have actually changed on here as well. Again, normally if you had a material that was set up correctly, you'd actually see the wood on this. This is kind of crummy, so we're using Fire to do it. You can play with it. So if I go back and I play with the U and I refresh, so I can actually rotate it. So I could rotate that 90 degrees to make it like linear. And then I have to adjust the tiling a little bit more. Once you set it up, you're like good to go. Okay. So experiment with the various settings, with like rotating, with adjusting the tiling. You can also do like half tiles. It's easier if you have the preview, but notice how the material actually has a slight reflection to it. It's got kind of a gloss to it. So you can actually rotate it. You can also, depending upon the way that you draw the box, change the orientation of it. You can also actually turn on, if you turn on the widget here, if you have this mapping widget, you can take this box, you see this mapping widget, and check this out. You can rotate the widget to anything you want, and that actually changes the mapping. So the widget is a representation of the way that it's gift wrapped. All right? And so if you want to adjust it, another way that you could adjust the rotation is to take the widget and rotate it 90 degrees, and that's going to give you that kind of tiling. Then you could go into the texture mapping and adjust the time. So see, it says it's been rotated 180 degrees in the Z. So I can rotate it physically, or I can rotate it using the settings. Anyway, so.
So is that like the same as the bulk pattern?
No. I'm not going to get into that.
I was just.
I'm not going to get into that. Yes, there's all kinds of layers to textures, but okay. So you can play with the tiling of it. If you need help with it, you can talk to me about it. I just want you guys to think about the way that your stuff is tiled. Same thing with this box here. Let's go in and do a box map on this. So channel 1. Again, I'm going to apply a map to it, and nothing really changes. But then if I go in, I can go to the texture. Actually, yeah, let's see if that did anything. Okay, so that's the tiling. It takes that and tiles it, to 1. And then if I go into the texture map, I could go in and actually give it a half tile, so 0.5. And it actually would make it beefier. Okay.
If you wanted just the top of it to read differently, let's say you wanted the top to be on a diagonal, how would you do that?
You could actually just explode this. And then you've got this piece, right? And then you can go in and you can actually add a planar map to it because it's just a plane, right? It's not a box anymore. All I need is a plane. And then you apply the mapping channel to it, and you draw on it, tile it, and so now if I go in, it's actually I can adjust the widget. So I'm going to rotate it. Whoop. I think I actually rotated the whole piece there. I just want to take the widget and rotate it. Now, it's okay if it rotates out of plane because, again, it's just mapping the geometry. I mean, it's a reference to the texture.
Right.
See? Okay. So you just separate stuff out. You have a lot of control over it. This is the thing that people don't. They just apply a material and then like, oh, it's brown, it's wood, you know, or like, oh, it has like texture. But no, it's like, how does it, like, what is the tiling of it? You can, okay, so let's go back to the building and I'll show you how you can kind of simplify all this. So let's say you have this whole building, and this is more like what you guys have. I'm going to load this into Maxwell. So this has been textured with, now, notice you don't even really read the concrete. Like, you don't even notice it. Like, it's actually not, that texture is like not showing up, okay? Let's go into the, I'm going to go into the scene manager and actually just make it a little bit more dull. I think physical sky is kind of messing with me. And now I also don't want to make it too late in the day. Okay, let's compare apples to apples here. Okay, so mid-afternoon. I don't want the sun to change the color of this. All right, so there's the thing. You might say it looks like concrete, but it really isn't the concrete that we set up, okay? So let's go in, and I'm going to go ahead and take concrete and right-click and say select all. Select objects, sorry. And that's going to select everything on the concrete layer. I'm actually going to go ahead and hide everything else. So I selected everything on the concrete layer. Now I go into my texture mapping, and I'm going to make a box map. And check this out. I'm going to, mapping channel 1, I'm going to snap to the back of the model. And, well, anyway, I'll do it this way. It's fine. And so I'm just going to draw a box around the whole thing. I'm going to kind of eyeball it. Good enough. Texture space single. And now the tiling. And for now, I'm not going to tile it here. I'm going to tile it as a 1 and 1. But if we look at it in Fire now, it's actually going to have some texture. It's going to be spotty. Do you see how it's slightly different, though? I mean, I don't have the other one for comparison, but do you see how it's kind of like modeled? Mm-hmm. Like it, yeah, look at the little scrubby bits. Okay, so this is like, I don't know, you guys ever read highlights when you were kids, you know, like Goofus and Gallant? This is like, sort of like Goofus applies his like material to his model, right? And Gallant texture maps it. So Goofus has applied, you know, the material, it's all stretched. It's like one piece of concrete that got stretched like a stocking over the whole building. Gross, okay? But better than before because it has some texture. So if I go in and I select everything again, and I go into texture mapping, I could go in and I can adjust the tiling. And so like if this is kind of the see, this is X. So we want to have more tiles in the X and more tiles in the Y, but more tiles in the X than the Y, right? Because of the dimensions of the box. Does that make sense? Imagine it's a whole thing, it's made out of sugar cubes or whatever, right? There's like 40 sugar cubes in this direction and like 10 in this direction, right? You want to like have the proportions be correct, okay? So if I go in, and then I want repeat, so the U repeat I'm going to say is 10, and the V repeat is going to be like 4. Now better, because like look at when I zoom in.
So you don't do, okay, so it's just subdividing whatever length.
Do you see that? You see the little things in it, the little control joints? I mean, that's part of the texture. You can find textures that don't have these in them, that don't have tensioning or whatever, but this is better. All right.
So you're not setting a unit size, you're setting a subdivision of whatever.
You could figure out the units, like you could go in and do the math and say, if my building is like 400 feet long and the panel that I have as a texture seems to be 10 foot or seems to be 5 foot, I therefore need 20 panels, I therefore need 40 panels. You kind of have to do the, and again, I think this might work on this, guys. If I go into rendered. Yep, okay, that shows up. See, you can see the seams in that. Take that, Maxwell Fire. So if I go in and I pick, and again, this is applied to everything. Like I mapped this whole like building as one chunk because I kind of had it all be the same material, right? And you want to scale that map for the whole building, for the material, okay? If you had a bunch of like wood, you could do that. You know, if you had a fence that just ran for a long time, if you get the tiling right the first time, you don't have to tile everything. But it's so much better, you know, and it's getting better. Okay, now let's select all, and you know, you can tweak it a bit. Like I might say, oh, that's not enough. Maybe I want 12 tiles, or 16 tiles, or 14 tiles, or like whatever. And just you can see it. I mean, it actually is going to update in the viewport. And these seams, you know, in the texture, somebody nicely supplied the seams for us, so we actually get a visual, and you can see it visually. They sort of are. They're kind of exaggerated in the texture preview. Okay, let's turn back on the glass, and let's turn back on the ground. But you can see, like, and then let's go ahead, and so now I've got like some actual images of the building. Let's tweak the. Well, let's go back to my camera. Actually, what am I doing here? See the texture on it though? Like it's got texture, and there's glass in there too. Let's go ahead and turn back on some of the. Let's go back to Maxwell and go to Scene Manager, and let's turn on. You know, go back to Physical Sky maybe. I did it again. Oh, at least you know it's not you.
Yeah.
It's Maxwell. Darn it, Maxwell. Okay. The Fire always tries to make the rendering the size of your window. Okay, so we got some problems with this view, so I need to go in and adjust my EV a bit. The ground got turned off for some reason. I don't know if I deleted it accidentally or like what. If I made it into glass or something. Oh, it'll come back. Okay. Oh, you know, I need to actually refresh the whole model. There we go. Better. Okay. So that's not bad. I like that. That's my rendering. That's what I want to submit for Betsy. Okay. As a start. Great. So what you want to do is you just go into render, and you can just say render. Okay. And it's going to spit this thing out. And then look at this. What happened here? Maxwell Renderer opens up, and it's a separate application. My copy is actually now registered, like my license expired from the school, so it's got this stupid like watermark on it. Let me go ahead and show you. So this is okay. So what's happening here? So this is what happens inside Maxwell. See how it's kind of fuzzy? So the image. What's nice about Maxwell, other renders, as you've ever seen in renders before, they'll render like down from the top of the screen real slow. They'll draw like a line at a time, or they'll do little buckets, like a 70s like sitcom or something like that, right? Maxwell just kind of shotguns the whole image and gives you a rough image, and then it gradually gets less and less rough, which is nice because you can say, okay, that's working pretty well. I'll let that go. Or you're like, why is that wall yellow? Like that's got to go, right? Instead of waiting for the thing to finish and then your yellow piece is down here. Maxwell's kind of nice. So what happens though is that it starts off very grainy, and you can see that SL and then next SL update. SL stands for sample level or sampling level. Okay, and so so it counts down and it says next sampling level, and so it's like you're driving and it's like next exit, you know, in like 30 miles, right? When that thing counts down to 0, it's going to update the sampling level. It's crunching. My computer is like chugging, right? Okay. Every time you get a sample level, it gets more and more like refined. Okay, but it's like an exponential time curve to time and sample levels. Okay, the first couple ones are really like cheap, right, and they don't take very long. But as the image gets more and more refined, they take longer and longer to do. Theoretically, there's no maximum, and it's basically 25 sample levels. A sampling level of about 12 is actually pretty adequate. It's going to get rid of most of the noise. You'll never get rid of like all the noise. Like this is a thing that people like don't really understand about Maxwell. Is that at some point, like there's always noise in the image because it's never going to like completely, you know, render it. But what you do is that you get a big enough image. So you make the image like twice as big as you need it. You render it to a high level, and then you just scale it down and print it, and it actually eliminates all the noise. Okay? The noisiest parts of the image are going to be your glass, because that's actually catching reflections from the rest. It has to render the other bits of the image so that the glass can render what's reflected. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Crazy, right? So your glass, if you have a lot of glass, you need a lot of sample levels, and it's going to take longer. Okay? These giant glass buildings are painful. on the computer. I don't want you to change your design, but I'm just telling you, okay? But you can see it's getting like better, it's getting more and more refined. But look at that texture.
That's really cool.
Pretty cool. And like the shadows aren't gray, they're slightly blue. You know? Very cool. Okay. So that's, now we'll talk about ground cover and what's going on though with this model. If you guys are actually seeing this, this ground that I drew is just a plane and the model's like sitting in it. It's not very clean. That's why you're not really getting shadows on the edge of this, is because it's actually not able to resolve those. It's not resolving like those intersections very well. Okay. This is not a clean model. This is not a good model. So your model has to be well crafted.
So you didn't cut your ground out, you just like pulled the building in.
Yep. You just sits in it like gel.
So you would want to cut it out.
You want to cut it out. You want to have a good, like, you know, yeah, you want it to sit on the ground. Like, don't just like squish it on the ground. I mean, it's okay if you do it, but it's better if you don't. Because I'm losing that intersection with, you're shooting some soft shadow on that. Like, it's actually kind of blowing out a bit. The better your model, and there's little bits, guys. If you look on the corner of the building and stuff, like some of these things, that's not really meant to be like a reveal to a bad piece of modeling. If your stuff is not like joined well, if you didn't snap things well, things are not in alignment with each other, then it's going to show up as a little shadow artifact. It's going to show up as a little catch of light you don't want. So a clean model is going to be a clean render. Now, if it's like the day before it's due and you end up with this thing, you can't re-render it. You can go into Photoshop and like heal it. We'll talk about that sort of thing. But the best thing is like going to the dentist, right? Is like brushing your teeth every day. Do it right in the first case, and you'll do less photoshopping like a week. Okay. But just like going to the dentist, there's always like Photoshop. There's always a way to like fix it later. Okay. Even if it's painful. Okay. So it's getting better, and it will keep processing. And what you can do is that you can set a time in minutes, and you can just say, give me what you got in 15 minutes, Maxwell, and it'll just do it, and it'll stop in 15 minutes. Or you can say, give me 12 sampling levels and damn the torpedoes. So if it takes like a day, if it takes like 5 minutes, it'll give you 15 or 12 sampling levels. Okay? So it works both ways. You can always just click stop anytime you want, and it'll just like flush out that rendering and it'll save it as a TIFF for you, or as a JPEG or whatever. Okay? My computer dead?
Yep, now it's back. It's coming.
It's better. You can see it's getting better though. Anyway, so and then you can change the output settings here. You can change the resolution here. You can change the image size. You can actually, it's cool. What's better than other programs is that you can actually change a bit of it. Like once you save the rendering, like once you have a rendering going, you can stop it, change the settings, and render it right here. You don't have to open up Rhino anymore. And you can save like I think it's an MXS or like an MXI file. I'll have to double check that from Rhino, and then that's the file you open up here. As long as you have like textures, as long as you have that file, you can open it up and just go to town on it. You can keep working in Rhino, keep working on Photoshop or whatever. Okay. So and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but this is the last step. So you do all your tweaking in Fire and you get it like kind of looking pretty good in Rhino. Get the lights right, get the materials on there right. Then you do the final rendering here. The size of the thing is up to you, right? I told you that, but typically you want like a pretty decent sized image for your final board. So you'll need to do a little bit of calculation in terms of like if the printer prints to 150 dpi or 300 dpi, and that's dots per inch, right? So you can kind of assume that's pixels per inch. And if you have like a 12-inch thing at the highest resolution, it might be 3600, by 1800. But maybe you don't want 300 dpi. Maybe that's actually too high because that'll take a long time to render. So you cut it down to 150 or something like that. But then you do your calculation. Okay? And remember what I said. You might want to render it even twice the size and then scale it down to get rid of some noise. So you have to, you have to think ahead of time about what resolution you want, and then budget for the amount of time it's going to take.
You said that there's a sample rate that tells you how many per second. I missed that.
The sample rate at the top is going to give you an estimate of it. And if you set it for a certain sampling level, if I say 12, it'll say time left. Okay. So right now, if I want sampling level 25, it wants 48 hours. You don't need it. Yeah. Sampling level 25 is basically like Newtonian. It's like recreating every photon in the image.
That's like a pretty good right there.
It's looking pretty good. It's a little fuzzy, but that's okay. carefully, you can go into Photoshop and actually add a slight blur to it and remove a little bit of those artifacts as well. There's tricks on it. Right? Okay, so does this seem doable? Once you sit down, let's go. I mean, I just showed you in an hour, like, essentially how, I think all the stuff you need, basically. You're going to need to shop for materials a little bit. I mean, look at the ones I gave you. But, and then just, find your camera, find your time of day, like, set up a really nice, like, shot, like an architectural photograph, right? Find that spot, get it tuned up, and then just kind of budget some time to play with it. You're going to want to give yourself time to get a nice, high-quality rendering out, and then time to add entourage to it. I think for Betsy, though, like, it'd probably be more important just to get the building out, and then for me, you can always add that stuff later. We're going to have some students come in later that are going to show us how they do it. There's some grad students that have done some really nice work with that, and they're going to talk about how to add in some plants and trees and people and things like that. Okay, to really kind of give it life. Because right now it has no scale, right? It has no mood. Your things are, you guys have a site. You guys actually have a place that your building goes on the site. If you go there and take a picture of like where your building should be, you can basically Photoshop your building right onto that location on the site. Okay. Yeah, so you find a time of day, find some nice spring foliage or something like that. Maybe go back to the photos you guys took in the winter, right? If you know where that is, I can show you how to like map it to where your building is on the site.
And so then we should render this at the time of day and time of year that we took the photo.
That would be a fantastic idea, right? You want the shadows to be right. Yeah, exactly, right. You don't have to do that though. You guys can like just take some other things and kind of evoke a mood, but that's something that a lot of architects do, right? Because it makes sense because you have the site, you know what it is. And nothing's better than like having the actual trees and the actual like ground conditions, right? Okay. We'll talk about that later, but that's it for today. I'll post a video. Materials are online, files are online. Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys. It looks better on my laptop than on the screen.
Yeah, it looks great.